Alright guys, I hope you're in for a long one because this one is gonna take a bit. There's so many things to cover so that it's gonna take a while. But it's time to get back to my Legendary Motherboards videos and the whole topic about like Legendary Motherboards from overclocking perspective. And the one we have over here in front of the camera today is probably the most legendary motherboard ever in the history of overclocking, PCs and so on. So today we will be taking a look at the ASUS Rampage Extreme motherboard for the 775 platform with the X48 Express chipset. So this is their most high-end motherboard they ever released to the 775 platform, and it's one of the early ones that has the design for overclocking statement already presented on the box. At the very beginning of the whole like ROG products lineup, it was always kind of like designed for gaming, but with the Rampage Extreme, like I think like Striker 2 Extreme, they wanted to stress out their capabilities in overclocking. So the 775 was really interesting platform in many ways. In many ways, it has a little bit of similarities with today's like X299 platform. What we have over here, what we have today with the X299 socket is that we have like a mix of mainstream CPUs and like the extreme high-end CPUs. So on the X299 we have like the mainstream oriented Kaby Lake X CPUs, so quad cores with and without hyperthreading, and then we have the expensive extreme CPU parts ranging from 6 cores all the way up to 18 cores, and those are the Skylake X CPUs with thermal paste, then Skylake X refresh CPU parts with solder, and now we have the new like fine-tuned Cascade Lake X CPU parts. But the thing I wanted to stress about that is that X299 is like a platform for everyone. It is like a mix of mainstream and extreme platform, and that was kind of the same thing on the 775 back in those days. So this board came out in late summer or early autumn of 2008, but 775 platform overall came out in like 2004, and it had really long like lifespan. 775 had support all the way until like very late 2010, almost until like 2011. The latest batches what I've seen on 775 CPUs have been like from very late 2010. So the lifespan of the entire 775 platform was like almost around like 6 years. That is a huge like lifespan if you ask me. When compared to like modern platforms, the life cycle of a modern platform is relatively short. When the 1155 platform was released with original Sandy Bridge in January 2011, it was exceeded by the original Haswell mainstream platform, so LGA775 in June 2013, so a little bit under 2.5 years. It's much shorter time compared to that 6-year time period of the 775. And 775 had multiple chipsets during its lifespan. We also had different memory types, so we have DDR2 from the beginning all the way until the end, and since 2007 we also had DDR3 coexisting with DDR2. Although at the very beginning and during this platform DDR3 wasn't that like widely popular, because at the very beginning DDR3 was quite expensive, and the most standard DDR3 isn't better than the most high-end DDR2. So the standard DDR3, so 1333 MHz, 999 timings, that is slower than like DDR2 1150 MHz, 555 timings. And the most high-end DDR2 I ever saw was a kit from jail. It was 1160 MHz, but 444 timings. That is really tough DDR2, and it's much better than the very standard DDR3, trust me. But of course, if you really get some good quality DDR3, which was coming out to the market at the very last days of 775, that's obviously better than even the most high-end DDR2, like very highly selected Elpida Hyper MGH DDR3 memory. So like Corsair Dominator GT 2000 MHz 787 timings, that's really good DDR3 memory. So you could even put like four sticks of those into this platform. You could run 8 GB of 2000 plus 787 DDR3. That is really good performance wise. So you had so many options on this platform. You had the mainstream chipsets like P35 and P45 with their sub chipsets, and then you also had the Extreme Intel platform on the same LGA775 socket. So you had the X38 and X48 with minimal differences between the two. Kind of same thing with P35 versus P45. P45 is like a fine-tuned version of P35 with newer Southbridge chipset, and same thing goes for X38 versus X48. X48 is kind of fine-tuned version of the X38, but performance-wise they are very similar. And then there were also the NVIDIA SLI chipsets, which had some differences compared to the Intel ones. The most important difference was that you could only run SLI officially on NVIDIA chipset-based motherboards. But overclocking wise, the Intel ones are better, although the NVIDIA chipset has quite good performance at like normal frontside bus speeds, but the NVIDIA chipset just cannot overclock the FSP so high compared to the Intel based platforms. But yeah, that's kind of like a very short summary of the 775 platform. But really, so this is an X48 platform, and the motherboards and the whole platform, the whole rig was very different back then compared to like platforms of today. Or when you run like a 775 platform, you could almost say, from like modern perspective, is that you almost have like two CPUs in a 775 platform. So you have like the real CPU. So let's say if you have like an E8600, E6600, Q6600, which you place inside the socket, that's your real CPU. So that is just a calculator in a 775 platform. It doesn't have any of the other features of a CPU from today, because they are residing in the motherboard, not inside the CPU. So many of the features of modern day CPUs, like memory controller, PCI Express, like lanes, possible internal graphics, they were residing inside the Northbridge of the motherboard. So the motherboard decided whether or not it has any of those features. And for example, X38, X48, nor even the P45, none of them have internal graphics. If you wanted internal graphics on 775 platform, you had to get one of those mainstream like cheapo sub chipsets. Like if you want to get the cheaper version of the P35 with internal graphics, then you would have to get a G31 based chipset motherboard. G stands for graphics, so G31 or G41. So those were the like motherboards that had internal graphics. So the Northbridge is almost like a second CPU, and since the launch of original Sandy Bridge in January 2011, the Northbridge from the motherboard was moved into the CPU itself, and that meant that the pricing of motherboards came down because they didn't have so many products from Intel anymore. So that was kind of good thing, if you ask me, from like consumer point of view, because back in the day, like this motherboard was really expensive. The Rampage Extreme, when it came out in like mid to early late 2008, it cost like 400 euros or 450 euros or even close to 500 euros. So back in the day, it was quite normal that the motherboard was more expensive than the CPU itself. The most notable CPU for the Rampage Extreme was the most high-end Core 2 Duo CPU from the Wolfdale CPU family, so E8600. And E8600 was like 250 euros when it came out in 2008. So the Rampage Extreme is almost like two times the price of an E8600, but that was quite normal back in the day. But just saying so that you understand the point of view, and that leads to other point of view as well. So in 775 days, the motherboards themselves varied a lot in quality between each other, because you had that like BGA, like second CPU over there, so the Northbridge. So you had to bin motherboards to find good ones that can do high frontside bus and very good memories in every situation. So we wanted to get a Rampage Extreme that could do really high frontside bus, like ranging from 650 all the way up to like over 700 megahertz. And also we wanted to get a Rampage Extreme or any other board that can do really good memories, like a good Rampage Extreme on air cooling. It can do 2100 megahertz or above with dual-sided DDR3, like Elpida Hypers with 675 timings. I have like 2 Rampage Extreme before this one, which I have had for a long period of time, and the other one is considered to be the most powerful Rampage Extreme of all time, which I often refer to as the Team Finland edition. That was originally given to SF3D as sample from ASUS in 2008. It has been truly amazing Rampage Extreme or X48 motherboard. It was able to do 710 FSP with Northbridge on water cooling and CPU on LN2. That is an insane figure. 710 FSP, that is like P45 territory, and even not that many P45 boards can do that kind of FSP. And not just FSP, I was able to do DDR3 2180 megahertz with 675 timings, all on air cooling with command rate 1. 676 was a little bit easier, but I was also able to do 675, and that was for Superpi 32 amps, so like stability confirmed. And I was able to do like 2200 megahertz with same timings for shorter tests like Superpi 1M. And when I put the RAM on LN2, I was able to do like 2260 megahertz with like 676 or 686 timings for short tests like Superpi 1M, and that was also with Northbridge on just air cooling. If I put the Northbridge on LN2, it could go a little bit better. But some boards, the Northbridge doesn't like cold at all. So if you go below like -5 or even 0, the memory controller becomes really bad. So you have to find the sweet spot temperature-wise. But yeah, so back in the day we had to bin motherboards, and that was also the case which Rowan or Debauer mentioned in his video. If you have watched his version about this board, he said he had in total like 6 or 7 Rampage Extremes over the years. But I wanted to make my personal video about this board because I think me and especially Sam OCX or Tapaka have the most like 775 hardware top scores or records, you could call them, on HWBot. If you go to hwbot.org and you search for any of the most popular CPUs of 775 days like E6600, Q6600, E8600, E8400, E8500, and so on, you will often find most of the time that the motherboard being used in those top scores is a Rampage Extreme. What a surprise! So that clearly proves the quality of this motherboard, that this is by far above all others in the competition. Only for like very simple stupid stuff like E8400 CPU Z validations and Superpi 1M, those are the very few like rare cases where you need a P45 board, because the mainstream platform can run a higher FSP compared to the Extreme chipset or platform. So a very good P45 board can run FSP up to 750. So you need that stupid high FSP for that high validation and Superpi 1M. Superpi 1M doesn't care about the performance, doesn't care about memory or the platform performance that much. It's only about the CPU. So that's why you need the mainstream chipset for those. But also one big difference is that the X38 and X48 are much better performing even at stock, out of the box, compared to the mainstream boards. So when I also tested this myself by running same CPU with identical memories, so comparing Rampage Extreme to the Gigabyte EP45T Extreme, the X48 is almost like 20% faster out of the box in some situations with identical settings. So it's kind of funny. So the X48 is already a lot better performing product compared to the P45. So I wouldn't see any reason like why would anyone had like built a really high-end gaming PC around the mainstream chipset back in those days, because with X48 you have much better performance out of the box, you have better memory overclocking. The mainstream chipset is very often limited to just command rate 2. With X48 like this, you can run much higher memory frequencies and you can run command rate 1 pretty much always. That's a huge difference. Command rate 1 is much better than command rate 2. And then you have more PCI Express lanes. You can run 2 cards with X16 on both, so you can run like Crossfire X and even SLI if you manage to hack the NVIDIA chipset requirement for SLI. But just saying, so you had a lot more options. Of course, the price of these boards is much higher compared to P35 and P45 boards. So pricing was the main reason why many people took those mainstream chipset based boards. But yeah, so this is a DDR3 based X48 board. When comparing to Rampage Formula, for example, Rampage Formula is the same board, but it uses DDR2. So it's an X48 board, but DDR2. So don't confuse the two. But DDR3 is better if you have really extreme DDR3 memory, like very highly binned LPDA hyper-based memory. But yeah, so let's take a closer look at this board. Let's unbox it and take an overview of the board in all of its glory. I wanted to save this a bit to the end because I wanted to make this video with a board that is like very fresh, like almost new from the store. I could have made this video with one of my current Rampage Extremes, but they are covered in Vaseline. They have multiple modifications on the board, so it doesn't really represent the board how it came out back in 2008. So recently I saw a deal on eBay, one guy selling a Rampage Extreme on eBay, and it was in mint condition, almost like new from the store. All the accessories, so it's almost like if it was just purchased from a store. So I wanted to make a video with a fresh board like that. So I just got this like 2 days ago. So let's unbox the board together. Let's look at all the accessories that the board comes with and just go through the motherboard very quickly, and we can make like a BIOS overview video later, and we can even make some overclocking tests, and then I could make a separate video about the best Rampage Extreme as well. So we don't have to do everything in the same video, or the video just ends up being ridiculously long. So let's just go through this board and then make an overall conclusion about it. But yeah, so Rampage Extreme, designed for overclocking. Nothing really special on the front side of the box. They only advertise about the fusion block system. So this is a really amazing board because they already have it's ready for water cooling out of the box. So they have a small water block for the Northbridge part of the motherboard. So the X48 chipset stands for the Northbridge. So X48 is the Northbridge part of the motherboard. So it has the PCI Express configuration in it. It has the memory controller, so memory controller hub / MCH, and it's the bridge that connects CPU, RAM, and PCI Express devices together, and that's why it's so important performance-wise. The Southbridge chipset on this board is the ICH9R, and it controls like the SATA devices, USBs, and so on. On the mainstream P45 boards, you have a little bit newer Southbridge chipset. It's called the ICH10R. It's a little bit newer. I think it even has like 2 SATA 3 ports out of the box or by default. And it's the same Southbridge chipset they even use on all of the X58 boards. So the ICH10R lasted for a very long time, from 2008 all the way up to like very late 2011. So just saying. But yeah, so the Southbridge chipset is the so-called chipset of today. So like Z170, Z270, Z390, the chipset of those boards is the same thing as the Southbridge chipset of motherboards of this age, because the Northbridge was moved inside the CPU. So that's like a short summary of the history how computer motherboards have evolved, or platforms, but this is mainly Intel stuff. So let's take a look at the backside of the board first. So here we can see in English, so LGA775 socket for like Intel Core 2 Extreme, Core 2 Quad, Core 2 Duo, Pentium Dual Core, Celerons and so on. Then chipset is Intel X48, again that's for the Northbridge, then ICH9R Southbridge chipset. FSP ranging from 800 all the way up to 1600 MHz, which is a very high figure obviously, and then memory dual channel DDR3 ranging from 800 MHz all the way up to 2000 MHz. But we as users, we determine how high figures a motherboard like this can actually run. So I personally have been able to run memory up to 2200 MHz on this board, so I personally have more experience about the real capabilities of this motherboard model than the ASUS engineers themselves in the ASUS headquarters in Taiwan. But yeah, so I think the most notable CPU from like daily perspective for a very expensive board like this would be one of the like the Core 2 Extreme models like QX9650 or QX9770, which was the most high-end 775 desktop CPU they released, and that had a 1000 euro price tag in those days. So E8600 is a relatively cheap CPU for daily use for a board like this. Of course it was great, but it was a dual core, and well, if you had this kind of sum to spend on a motherboard, you could have probably got a QX9650 or Q9550 or QX9770, but just saying. Then they advertise that it's water cooling ready, fusion block system, so you have water cooling on the Northbridge already out of the box. Then they have a crazy VRM structure on all of the main rails, so you have 16 phases for the CPU, 2 phases for memory and 3 phases for the Northbridge. So here is like a sneak peek of Northbridge part of the board, and they have like ML caps, so you can see these like weird Fujitsu ML caps on each of the 3 main rails, so on CPU, memory and Northbridge. The funny thing about these Fujitsu caps was that some of them had like some self-destruct phenomenon. So some unlucky users found out that their Fujitsu caps suddenly went in flames and they just died for no reason. And when they die, they can take out something else with them. So if the Fujitsu cap like burns and dies, you have to desolder it and replace it with something else from your own, like just standard caps or something similar like that. But just saying, I personally have never seen any of these caps going bad, but it is something that can happen, so just saying. Then they bundle some software with this board, like 3D Mark 06, which was the newest 3D Mark at the time, along with 3D Mark Vantage. But 775 is usually being run in Windows XP, and that's where 3D Mark 06 was the newest one, because 3D Mark Vantage requires Windows Vista or newer. And the same thing as with Striker 2 Extreme, Maximus Extreme and so on, this board doesn't have any onboard audio, so they include this Supreme FX audio sound card from Creative, and that's your onboard audio. So there's no audio at all on the motherboard's PCB, so you have to use this if you want any audio in your system. But yeah, so that's the front and back side of the board. So let's open this flip top part of the box. So here you can see like a short sneak peek of the board. So here's the sound card and there's the fusion block system with the ROGI logo over there. And here we have some advertisements. So we have speeding HDD, CPU level up feature, which I never tried, EPU 6 engine, and load line calibration was introduced with this board. It's very good, so it compensates any of the possible voltage drop when the CPU goes on the load. Then we have optional like thermal products with this, or thermal accessories with this board. So we have different heatsink options. So if we don't want to put the Northbridge on water, you can replace the water block with a small air cooling heatsink, which is very recommended thing to do if you don't use water. So you have better cooling performance on the Northbridge itself. Then we have, and then we also get like an additional cooling fan, which you can even attach above, I mean on top of the air cooling heatsink to even boost your cooling performance on the Northbridge. But I never used this fan myself. I don't think it's very like strong and it's quite loud. So I always used my like own custom cooling fans, which have better performance than this one over here. Then you have like separate MOS heatsink, which you can use to replace the standard VRM heatsink on this part of the motherboard. It's not necessary to use that one, but if you want to get a little bit better cooling performance on the VRMs, you can replace the stock VRM heatsink over here with that one. I'm not fully sure why they made it so, and why didn't they just attach this, attach that one by default, but maybe it's because of like compatibility reasons, because this one is relatively tall VRM heatsink, but that's just saying, but I'm not fully sure. And then the fusion block system, but yeah, I never tried water cooling on this board, water cooling the Northbridge, but it's something I should definitely try, but I might do that later. I might build a fancy daily system around this board, because this is so fresh. I could try something like that with this one. Then let's turn on the camera a little bit. So here we can see the features of the flip top part of the packaging. So here we have Extreme engine. We have like short peak of the VRM structure, so 16 phases for CPU, 2 for memory, 3 for Northbridge, with these ML caps on each of the 3 main rails. So behind the CPU on the backside of the board, then we have one next to the memory VRM, and then one next to the Northbridge VRM. Then we have like BIOS flashback feature. It's not the same as what we have in modern motherboards, but it's so that if either of the BIOS is corrupt, you can use the second BIOS to recover the main one. And then and also the BIOS chips are removable. So if you corrupt both of the BIOSes, you can do the same thing what I did with the Crosshair 5 formula to recover the corrupted BIOS chips. And the most important feature of this board is the LCD poster for sure. So you can use the LCD poster the same way as with OC panel nowadays. So you can even increase or decrease the CPU frequency even during a benchmark. So it's very handy for like 3D benchmarking. You can drop the CPU clock by decreasing the frontside bus by like 5 MHz for the CPU part of the test. So for example, in 3D Mark 06, you can drop the CPU frequency from 6.6 GHz to 6.5 for the CPU part, and then you can increase it back up for the 3D part. So it's very handy, but it's quite common that the LCD poster dies over time. So I never even tried the LCD poster because it was always dead on arrival when I got the motherboards. So it's very likely that the LCD poster of this board as well is dead. But if it works, I will give it a try, because it's funny that after all these years I never even tried that feature, but just saying. So it's very likely that it's dead if you get the Rampage Extreme used from sites like eBay. And it's controlled with the small joystick and other buttons at the bottom side of the motherboard. And then it has these voltmeter LEDs. So the LEDs on the board will tell you if you are running what kind of voltage levels. So green means you are running low values, yellow or orange is you are running a bit like risky values, and red means you are running dangerously high values. but it's just good indication of what the board is running. But yeah, so that's pretty much it. Extreme tweaker means when you enter the BIOS, you will go straight to overclocking. So let's open up this box and see what the board comes with. Take a look at all the accessories and just go through the motherboard overall. So here we have the board itself, but I think we should take a look at the accessories first. So here we have all the accessories. So it's funny that they actually had a completely separate box for accessories back in those days. Usually the accessories were kind of minimal, so they were just at the bottom of the box. But yeah, so this is how it looks like. So we have multiple accessories, we have different cooling accessories, but let's just go through them quickly. So here we have the I/O shield plus the LCD poster, but as I already said, it's very likely that it's not going to work, but we have to test that, of course. So you would just look at the figures you read over here and just control the motherboard's joystick to choose between the options, and you can overclock even during the benchmark. Here is some water cooling accessories for the fusion block system, but as I said, I have never used the fusion block myself, but it would be very worthwhile to test that one someday. We have some like temperature sensors, like 2-pin connectors, like 2 pieces of them, again if you want to. Driver CD, and yeah, with the drivers inside. And here we have the the additional cooling fan for the Northbridge air cooling heatsink, should you want to use it. The user manual, very handy. Of course, I don't have to refer to this that much anymore, but you will get that one. And then we have some SATA cables, some additional power cables over there. Then we have, I think these are like IDE cable plus floppy cables. Then we have, I'm pretty sure I didn't get these with the other boards. So I think these are like small standoffs to use the board as a test bench, but I'm not even sure I've seen these before. So do these even belong to the Rampage Extreme? I'm not fully sure, because again, this is a used one. Some installation guide for the fans. We have some separate like external USBs plus firewire, which you can attach to the rear part of the case, like with graphics cards and the sound card and so on. Front panel connectors over here to make the installation process easier. And here we have the additional cooling accessories. So here in this box we have the additional cooling heatsink for the Northbridge. So this is very handy. You definitely should use this one if you don't use the water cooling on the motherboard. So if we take a close look at the board, just briefly, so if you don't use water cooling, you should replace that fusion block over there with this one, and you can then attach the cooling fan on top of the Northbridge air cooling heatsink if you wanted to maximize your air cooling performance on the Northbridge. But these are all options which you can choose from, but just saying. So I have mainly used this one because I haven't tried any water cooling on the Northbridge. But no, water cooling would definitely be worthwhile on these whole platforms, because the Northbridge has so huge impact on overall performance on these old platforms. So keeping it as cool as possible will give you the best overclocks as well. So we can put that to the side, and then over here in this last packaging we have we have the additional VRM heatsink. So over here, and it even has the original plastic as well, so it hasn't even been used once. So you can replace the stock VRM heatsink and replace it with this one over here. I think for compatibility reasons they didn't have this one like by default, because this is relatively tall, so it might be it might limit some installation situations with some cases, but I'm not sure. But you can use either of these. I think the performance is already great with this one over here. And they actually use thermal paste between these heat sinks and that copper heat pipe over there. So the copper heat pipe makes direct contact with the MOSFETs, I believe, or almost direct contact, and then it just makes direct contact with these heat sinks. So you can choose which heat sink you want to use. But those are the accessories you get with this board pretty much. So the main accessories are the sound card and these all these cooling options you can choose between, or you can choose from on the board. So definitely very nice pack of accessories if you ask me, but of course the main focus is on the board itself and the overall performance. So let's move those to the side, just like that. And let's take a closer look at the board itself. So here is the Supreme FX sound card by Creative. It's it's very simple. So you have your 7.1 audio from this sound card. I never actually used this one, so I definitely should build some like daily rig around this board and maximize and test like how it feels, how it would feel to run the most high-end gaming system of 2008 in 2020, for example. Let's try to open the motherboard packaging. Oh. So here. So as you can see, there's no audio at all here at the rear I/O. So the last item here at the rear I/O is the second Ethernet plus some USB 2.0. So the sound card would go into this black PCI Express 1X slot over here, and it would be your first like extension device over there. So quite handy if you ask me. It's not a bad choice really. They had like similar thing with other boards of that time, and even with like Rampage 3 Black Edition they had that Thunderbolt audio plus networking external device, and it was quite funny and it was quite good actually as well. But yeah, here's the Rampage Extreme in all of its glory. So it's kind of mix of colors when compared to like color schemes of motherboards of today, but in my eyes it looks really good, and you can really see that this is almost like new from the store. Like literally, like it hasn't nearly been used at all. So it looks really good to my eye if you ask me. So it even has all the original plastic over here. So no one has ever signed this board at all. So here we can see, so we have a socket cover CPU Celeron over there. We have the VRM heatsink assembly over here. Northbridge with its original Fusion water block. We have two full length PCI Express X16 slots, so the blue ones over here. So, and they will run X16 on both if you put a graphics card on both of them. So you can run like two-way Crossfire X with both of X16. So X48 chipset has more PCI Express lanes than a modern day mainstream CPU. It's quite funny. So with this you can run two cards at X16 or even two cards in SLI if you hack the SLI to run on a non-NVIDIA SLI based motherboard. But just saying, then you have 3 PCI Express 1X slots and 2 PCI slots. So if you want to get like onboard debug LED, you can put a debugging guard on either of these PCI slots should you wish. Then we have multiple fan connectors throughout the board. I'm not fully sure that how many there are in total, but there are plenty. And here are the controls to use the LCD poster. So you will connect the LCD poster somewhere over here, and you will just select between the options with this joystick over here and with these buttons. So for example, if you are running the second graphics test of 3D Mark 06, you can quickly drop the CPU frequency by lowering FSP to like from 660 to 650, press apply, it will run 6.5 for the CPU parts, and then you can go back up to 660 and continue the last two 3D tests at 660 FSP. It was quite handy, a bit similar like what is OC panel today with modern ROG boards like Maximus 9 Apex, 10 Apex, 11 Apex and so on. You get the idea for sure. Then we have there's one temp sensor over there. Then we have here is the BIOS control, so we have two removable BIOS chips over here. There are three options you can choose from over here. So you can choose, the first one is BIOS select. So if you put the cap on the left option, the motherboard will be in dual BIOS function, and you can choose between the two BIOSes with this switch over here. Generally, what I would run is that I would force the board to run in single BIOS mode with either of the BIOS chips. So if it's at the center, like it is right now, it means that the first BIOS chip is being forced. So you can run like the normal latest BIOS, so the 1301 BIOS on the first BIOS and force it, and you can run like a modified BIOS on the second BIOS chip. And if something goes wrong, it will not try to recover anything from the backup BIOS if you have the either of the BIOS is forced in single BIOS mode like this. So you can run like a modified BIOS on the backup BIOS, which gives better performance in some specific tests, which we can talk more about later. But you will get the idea, I'm sure. Then we have multiple USB ports over here for your case and so on. And here are the front panel connectors in the usual spot. Here, when looking at this side of the board, we have 6 SATA 2 ports over here. They are coming from the ICH9R Southbridge chipset. So all are SATA 2, no SATA 3 on the ICH9R. There should be 2 SATA 3 ports in the ICH10R Southbridge chipset. These black ones are third-party SATA ports by Marvell chipset. I think these are mainly for like RAID. So these are called like speeding HDD. So if you plug, let's say, 1 terabyte hard drives on each, you can make them run in a RAID very simply, but with the Marvell software. I think these ports are mainly for like RAID, like some RAID 1 or RAID 0 storage, but I'm not fully sure, but that's what I would expect, that if you put 2 similar drives, they will be automatically in like RAID 0, something like that. Then we have 1 IDE port over here, 1 floppy drive port over here, the 24 pin in its usual spot. We have 4 DDR3 slots. So DDR3, not DDR2. DDR2 was much more common in 775 boards than DDR3, but this is a DDR3 board. The white ports or the white slots are the primary ones. So if you put 2 sticks of memory, you put them in the white slots and then the blue ones. And you can run like even 4 gigs of DDR3 memory on this, and I think you can even run 16 gigs. So 4 gigabyte memory sticks, I think, with like newer memory sticks, I believe. So that's a lot of memory in an old rig like this. And when looking at the power delivery side of things, we have the CPU fan connector over here. We have the memory VRAM underneath this heatsink over here, with the one Fujitsu cap hiding over here, which tend to self-destruct, at least on some users' boards. VRM heatsinks over here, and this is the one you can replace with the accessory one. And 1 8-pin EPS power connector. Funny, as this is a 16-phase VRM structure on the CPU, they could have added like 8+4 power connectors for the CPU. or maybe even dual 8-pin, but just thinking because a Q6600 or a Yorkfield quad core with 1.85 volts in like W prime or Citybench, it can actually draw quite a bit of power on LN2. So if you run like QX9650 at 5.8 GHz in W prime, Cinebench with 1.9 volts, it definitely draws quite a bit of power, and it easily triggers the overcurrent protection of the CPU VRM. So they could have added like 8+4 power connectors for the CPU, but this is just my personal opinion really. One extra fan port over there, then we have the LCD poster connector over there, and then this ROG logo actually lights up. It's quite funny and it looks cool, so it's just like blue colored logo, not really like red like how the ROG thing goes otherwise, but it looks quite cool. You can remove the lighting effect by unplugging this if you don't like it. Then we're looking at the rear I/O part of the board. We have one PS2 port for your keyboard, 6 USB 2.0 ports, so 2, 4, 6, dual Ethernet, one eSATA and one Firewire port, and then your clear CMOS button over here. So that's pretty much it, but really this is only about the performance that makes this board so special, and I already told you the main specifics about this board. So great FSP or FSP capabilities exceeding above all other competitor models from other manufacturers, and memory capabilities are really from another planet as well. Many boards, even many X48 boards from other vendors, they struggle to go any above like 1900 megahertz. So when this can do like over 2100, even close to 2200, it's really from another planet, and those are the main differences. What separates this board from the competition. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So I hope you like to see this board in a good close view like this. Definitely you should watch the video from Roman or Debauer as well, but I really wanted to make one myself because me and Sam OCX or Tapaka, if you know him, we have made so many top scores with this board model. Like if you combine our top scores, it's almost like 90% of all the top scores on HWBot with the most popular 775 CPUs, like 80 to 90%. So I think many people have run this board, but not that many people have so hardcore experience with this board compared to what me and Sam have. So just saying. But yeah, so I hope you like to see this board. And if you ever owned this one yourself, then please drop a comment down below and maybe leave a question if you have any questions about this board. But we can make the BIOS overview video later, and then I can make even a separate video about the Team Finland edition, show many of the secrets what I found about this board and so on. But yeah, so thanks for watching one of my videos once again, and I will see you on the next one.